Greetings, nutrition students. So I want to again make sure that you have the correct information to be prepared for exam number 1. So for those of you who have never had a class with me before, this will be new for you. But what I'll do is I will go through the study guide, chapters 1 through 6, and just make sure that the answers that I'm looking for on the exam are what you got out of the PowerPoints and out of my kind of conversation as I was going through those PowerPoints. So just kind of follow along with, again, your study guide. You should have that in hand as we do this, and make sure again that you have the correct information. I'm going to go through it quickly, as again, I kind of talked all about this during our chapter 1 through 6 various videos that I did, but here we go. All right, so chapter number 1, talking about kind of an overview of health and nutrition and all of that. So limits the availability of food. And what we mean is really what determines our food choices. 1, health status or concerns. So if you're somebody who is a diabetic or who has particular health issues, you're going to be limited. You can't eat everything that you want, correct? 2, where a person lives. So where you live, whether you live in an urban area, urban meaning like a downtown, central area, you may not have access to a lot of markets or grocery stores that have fresh fruits and vegetables. Convenience, maybe you don't have transportation, a car to go to grocery stores to get all of that. So again, where you live. And the third point would be socioeconomic status. When we say socioeconomic status, or SES, it stands for your class or your income level. And so not all of us can go to Trader Joe's or can go to Sprouts, or we can go to stores that have a lot of organic products or products that are very costly. We just can't financially afford that. So those 3 things determine for all of us kind of some of the food choices that we make. Processed food. So the definition of processed food, it is any food that has been changed from its natural state. So again, we take a stalk of wheat or of corn and we alter it in some way, we process it. All 6 classes of our nutrients perform which function? All 6 of them help to regulate our body processes. Remember, every time that you and I breathe in and out, every time that we stand up, every time that we do something, our body needs energy to do all of those different things. And so it helps to regulate all of the different, think of it as, mechanisms or gears or shifts that make us go. Those are the body processes that have to work together. And that's what those 6 nutrients help to do. Macronutrients. So what are the macronutrients, right? There's 3 big ones. Right? They are going to be carbohydrates, our lipids or fats, and then our protein, which are our amino acids, right? So again, not vitamins, not minerals. Those are, kind of the micronutrients, but the macros, carbs, fats, protein. Calories. So calories are, the kcals, we kind of abbreviate them. That is the energy provided by the foods. So when we eat our food, we measure it, it breaks down, and we get some energy from that food, and we measure that in kcals, right? So we will say the kcals that you get, remember the different numbers we talked about, 4, 9, 4, those numbers, right, is the energy, and we talk about it in kcals. Homeostasis. So homeostasis is this body process, or what we call a physiologic, which really means, physical body processes that take place in the body that keep body temperature, they keep heart rate and blood sugar relatively constant, right? So it's a stable state. I like to think of it as being in balance or equilibrium. Right, so when those 3 things, right, your body temp, your heart rate, your blood sugar, when they're in the normal ranges, right, our body's happy. We are in proper regulation of where we should be. When any of those 3 are out of whack, too high, too low, then our body is going to go through what we call allostasis. And it's going to say, fix this because it's not right. I should be in balance, right? Nutrient density. Nutrient density is a measure of the nutrient content in a food compared to the energy content or kcals that you get from it, right? So again, let's say that we eat something like a breast of chicken, right? So remember, for that breast of chicken, we are going to get a certain number of calories or kcals out of that chicken. And if we took the chicken and we compared it to something like a Red Bull or a soda, right? We may have the same number of calories, right? They may both have 250 calories. However, one of them contains nutrients. So that chicken breast is going to provide us with a lot more nutrients, vitamins, minerals, right? The macronutrients that we need. Whereas the Red Bull or soda is going to have virtually no nutrition. So nutrient density, this one is going to be very heavy in nutrient density, and this one is not. There's going to be calories, but no like actual good stuff in here. And that's what we mean when we say nutrient dense foods. We want them to have calories, but we want them to also be full of good stuff for us, right? And that's what we should be looking towards for our diets. How can we consume nutrient dense foods to help ensure a healthy diet? So a proper diet, a healthy diet, right? Number one, eat foods that have been minimally processed. The more you eat a food in its natural state, the more nutrients it's going to have. When we process, we take that stuff out to make it taste good for us, right? And to make sure it sits on the shelf for a month, right? If you were to take fresh bread that you bake, you'll realize that after a few days, that fresh bread starts to mold, right? Because it's fresh. The reason that you can buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store and you can literally leave it on your counter for a month is because of the fact that it's got preservatives in it. It's been processed to put chemicals and things in it that makes it not mold, right? And so, number one, eat foods that have been minimally processed. Number two, consume foods with a high nutrient content compared to the kcals, right? So we want foods that if they have 300 calories in them, I want it to also have a lot of nutrients in it. So we just said nutrient dense foods. That's what we want. And number three, limit our fats and sugars, right? So those three things are the way that we can help make sure that we have a proper or healthy, nutrient-rich diet. Processed foods compared to freshly prepared foods. So our processed and convenience foods, right, tend to provide more calories, definitely. They are going to contain less nutrients or fewer nutrients in them. They're going to be higher in fat. They're going to be higher in sugar and higher in salt. Right? So again, these are our processed convenience foods. So think of your frozen meals, right, from Stouffer's or things of that nature. Think of all of your quick meals. All of that, if you read the packages, they have a whole lot of sodium. They have a whole lot of preservatives in them. And so those things are not going to be as healthy for you compared to having fresh foods. Chapter 2, we started talking about dietary guidelines. Here we were learning that the RDAs, right, the recommended daily allowance, the nutrients needs of what percentage of the healthy population. And we said that if we adhere to or follow the recommendations of the RDAs, it meets the needs of about 97 to 98% of the population. And that's the number we need to know for the test, right? So 97 to 98%. Therefore, the next point, planning menus for a school breakfast or lunch programs are really best done by using the RDAs, because we know if we use the RDA that most of those kids, 97, 98%, are going to be within some good healthy ranges there, right? Ingredients on food labels are determined by what? So remember we said that when you look at a list of ingredients on a food package, and there'd be like a paragraph or a section, right? And they're listed, the ones at the very front or top are going to be by weight. So what weighs the most in this listing, right? So it's determined by the contribution of weight of that ingredient. Doesn't necessarily mean that that first ingredient is going to be the most nutritious or be the most concerning, right? Because obviously sugar may not weigh a lot. Other things may weigh more than that, but this item may still have a lot of sugar in it. why does My Plate Guide recommend, what's the recommendation, I apologize, from My Plate Guide for physical activity? So to manage weight and prevent unhealthy weight gain, My Plate says that we should be doing about 150 minutes of physical activity per week, right? So, 5 days at 30 minutes a day, or you can break it down however you want, but a total within 7 days of 150 minutes. That is the recommendation. Daily values K-calorie diet. So for most of us, we are on a 2,000 K-cal diet. So if you look at the packages on most items, it'll say these numbers are based on a 2,000 K-cal diet. Again, I said there's going to be instances when we're out of that range, right? If we have an athlete, or we have somebody who does a lot of physical activity or that nature, or somebody who's going through a physical illness, you need to actually have Ensure and have some other products that are going to give you more calories to battle that disease, right? So, but on average, we're talking about a 2,000 K-cal diet. Dietary supplements and tolerable upper index intake levels, ULs. So with ULs, what that means is it's the tolerable upper intake level that are likely to be exceeded when we take dietary supplements. So for most of us, we don't have to worry about having toxic levels of a certain supplement. However, when we say take dietary supplements, I mean actually, have pills. So if you go to GNC or anywhere and you buy supplements of vitamin K, if you pop 20 pills of vitamin K a day, that might be a way to get to those ULs or those concerning upper levels. Most of us don't have to worry about that. Empty calories. So empty calories are from added sugars and or solid fats. So that's where we're getting those empty calories. When we say empty, we mean that we get the calories, we get the numbers, but we don't get nutrients, right? That's what we call empty. So again, when we talk about your sodas or your donuts or, candy, things of those nature, they really don't give you vitamin A, vitamin C. They're not giving you nutrients, but they're giving you calories. That's where they're coming from. Chapter 3, we start talking about, digestion and absorption. This is a really important chapter. So the most important roles of the digestive system is 2 things. It is digestion and absorption. Remember, I talked about that. We need both of those. We need to break down or digest our food, but then it's so important that our body be able to pick it up or absorb it once we've done that. The sequence and the forming of organs, we talked about our smallest molecules being the atom. So the atom cannot be broken down any further. So we go really from atoms to molecules to then forming groups of tissue. And then those groups of tissues form into organs, which then again can make up systems, which can make a person, a living being. The small intestine is the primary site of nutrient absorption. So we talked about that the small intestine is like 20 feet long, even though we call it the small intestine. And oh, sorry for the blackout there. That's the place where most of our food is, broken down and absorbed into the body. And so primary site of absorption, the small intestines. The digestive tract. Talked about the GI, gastrointestinal tract is what we call the digestive tract. Right? We said it begins at the mouth when we intake food, and it ends at the anus when we actually excrete the foods or waste products that are not going to be used by our body. What type of food stays in your stomach the longest? Well, we talked about first, the food that leaves your stomach the fastest is going to be your carbs. Right, your carbs is your instant jolt of energy and nutrient, right? This food that stays in your stomach the longest is going to be fatty foods, right? So fried foods, an example would be if you had a meal at Burger King, McDonald's, anywhere like that, that meal is going to sit inside of your stomach because it has a lot of fat in it, and it's going to take longer for it to be digested and absorbed. The large intestine. So the primary function of the large intestine is to prepare and store unabsorbed food residue for excretion. So in other words, the job of the large intestine, it's kind of like a storage tank, holding cell for stuff that our body is going to get rid of. So this is going to be the foods that we couldn't break down and digest, and toxic stuff. So any bacteria or different toxins that we got in our food, the body wants to get rid of that. Metabolism. Metabolism, the sum of the chemical reactions that occur inside of our body cells is what you'll want to know for the exam. Right? So think of it as the way that our body takes food and makes it into energy. Right? We metabolize them. There's all these chemical reactions happening that help us to function correctly. Kidneys. The job of the kidney is really to filter out what we call metabolic waste products out of our blood. So it filters out metabolic waste products out of our blood. So it's like a cleaning system. Right? The blood goes through the kidney, and the kidney's job while it goes through there is to clean it, take all the toxins and bad stuff out, right? And then let it continue going all healthy and clean, right? That's the job of the kidneys then. Right, chapter 4. Chapter 4, talking about kcals per gram for carbs. So for carbohydrates, your kcals 4 gram is what number? Hope you all said 4. Right? So for every gram of carbohydrate that we eat, it equals 4 kcals. Complex carbs. Complex carbs are the best source of foods. So these are going to be better than our simple carbs, but complex carbohydrates, and the best source there is going to be our cereals or our grains, preferably whole grains, but cereals and grains. Carb loading or carbohydrate loading. It's a training technique used by some endurance athletes to help increase the glycogen stores. Glycogen, Glycogen. So we talked before that, you know, a lot of our carbohydrate is broken down, and it's broken down into sugars or glycogen, and it's stored. And so this loading, what happens here is, again, athletes are eating excess carbs before an event that they want to have some extra running power for, extra strength for. And then the body retrieves those glycogen stores to be used at that time. Dietary fiber. So remember, dietary fiber is characterized by its solubility in water, right? So we talked about insoluble and soluble fiber. And dietary fiber, meaning the fiber that comes in our diet that our body can process, is characterized by its ability to be broken down or soluble in water, which means our body can then absorb it. Diabetes is best characterized by abnormally high blood glucose levels. So abnormally high blood glucose levels, that's kind of the main characteristic of diabetes. And insulin is the hormone most important for glucose uptake by the body cells. So remember, we need helpers in our body. We've mentioned this before. There's these different hormones and enzymes and all these helpers. And insulin is a helper that helps to catch that glucose and uptake it, meaning transport it or get it to be absorbed into our cells. Chapter 5, we started talking about lipids and fats in this chapter. And the recommendations for most of us here for our fat intake is going to be about 20 to 35% of our total kcals. So 20 to 35% of our kcals, meaning, again, fat's not always a bad thing. Fat intake for Americans in general, over the last 40 years or over the last few decades, we've seen fat intake has really declined as a proportion of total kcals that we've consumed. So Americans aren't struggling as much with an increase in our fat intake. Saturated fatty acid has only a single bond between its carbon atoms. Saturated fatty acids has only a single bond between its carbon atoms, right? And again, saturated fatty acids is the one we kind of want to steer clear of more than the unsaturated. Trans fatty acids are most abundant in foods that contain partially hydrogenated oils. So you can read packaging labels and find that partially hydrogenated oils, not healthy for you. Flat out, just not healthy for you. The organ that manufactures cholesterol, that means that in our body there is an organ that can produce on its own, manufacture cholesterol, is the liver. The liver is the organ that can manufacture cholesterol. HDLs are high levels of these HDLs, high density lipoproteins in the blood, are associated with a reduced risk of heart disease. So the HDL is what we call the good cholesterol. Remember, we said the LDL is the bad cholesterol. That one actually takes cholesterol to your heart and deposits it there. The HDL takes it away and actually gets rid of cholesterol. Energy in excess. So when energy in excess, meaning extra calories, kcals, are ingested in excess amounts than we need. So let's say you have, for your size, you need a 2,000 calorie per day diet. If we consume 3,000 calories a day, the excess is then converted into triglycerides, which are then stored in the body as adipose tissue. And we said adipose tissue is really kind of our fat, our parts of the body that form our shape. And when we have too much excess, then we are going to store that body fat. And if we then don't do something to expend it, like running or exercising or playing a sport, things of that nature, it's just going to accumulate. And that's what we don't want to have, because that leads to unhealthy consequences for our body. So bile. Bile can help fat and water mix by breaking down those large fat globules into smaller ones. So we said bile is really necessary in our stomach and in our small intestine to help break down that food, right? We need our acid, we need our enzymes, we need our bile, we need all of those different things. And bile can help fat and water mix by breaking large fat globules into smaller ones. Essential fatty acids are not synthesized or made by the body. So remember, when we hear the word essential, it means we need to get them from our diet, because our body doesn't produce it in any way. And so if we don't get it from our diet, it would be lacking. Increase the risk of developing heart disease. So the following health conditions increase these risks, right? Number one is type 2 diabetes. If you have type 2 diabetes. Number 2 is high blood pressure. And number 3 is obesity. So these 3 things increase our risk of developing heart disease. High-fat diets. So the reasons high-fat diets contribute to weight gain and obesity. Number 1, high-fat or fat provides more kcals per gram than does carbohydrate and protein. Remember, we talked about that. We said that carbohydrates and protein provide 4 kcals per gram, whereas fat provides 9 kcals per gram. Number 2, fat does not provide as much satiety as carbohydrates. So satiety is when you feel full. So when we eat carbohydrates, we tend to feel full after eating so much. With fat, we get that texture and flavor and aroma. And what happens with fat is we don't feel like we're full, which means we want to overconsume. And number 3, the conversion of dietary fat to stored fat in our adipose tissue is really efficient. Our body is good at taking fat and converting it into the body fat, right? And so those 3 reasons are what we are concerned about when we talk about diets that are high in fat. Be able to calculate kcals from fat. So again, we talked about this in chapter 5. I think there was an example on slide number 33 in chapter 5. So if you want to go back to the PowerPoint slides and go through that example on slide number 33. And I think there was another example at the end of that chapter's PowerPoints to give you more practice in kind of figuring out the formula and how to convert there. Chapter 6, we talked about protein. And so for chapter 6, the primary source of protein for the world, right, for the entire world, primarily comes from plant sources. right? So plant proteins, which is our grains and our vegetables. The primary source of protein here in the US is animal-based. So most of our protein comes from animal sources, all right? And so, think about it. We have been trained here in America that when we go to dinner or we eat a meal, our chicken or our fish or our meat is the center of our plate. It's animal-based, and then we have a carb and we have some vegetables and a bread or whatever it is, right? And so that is because, again, we live in a wealthy nation where we have access to meats and animal products, whereas a good part of the world doesn't either have access to that or they just really understand the value of having a plant-based protein diet. Nutrients in plant protein is going to be fiber. We talked about the importance of fiber for healthy aging. So fiber is the nutrient that is a good nutrient to have in our plant protein. The primary nutrient in animal protein is saturated fat. And again, we want some, we just don't want a lot. The building blocks of protein are amino acids. Food allergies involve an interaction between a dietary protein and the immune system. We said that a food allergy really happens when your body absorbs the food without having it broken down or digested first. We always want digest first, absorb second. Excess intake of animal protein. So foods could cause an increased risk of heart disease, right? Because when we have excess intake of animal protein, this is where we get into having excess saturated fat. And that saturated fat is what we're concerned about because it accumulates in our arteries that provide oxygen or blood to our heart. We can then eventually develop a heart attack. Vegan vegetarian is the only type or style of vegetarian that has a pattern of food intake that eliminates all animal products, including your eggs and your milk because they come from animals. Right? All right, so I have gone over the 6 chapters that we have gone through in this class so far, and I've gone over your study guide. So again, these should have correlated with the information in your PowerPoint slides, but again, when you take this test, you're fortunate, you're taking it online, you will have access to your study guide and to your learning materials. So I think that you should do well. So we will see you as we continue on this nutritional journey.